Hello everybody, hope you're doing marvellously well. I'm here at the bakery with Mr. Eric Boulanger. How are you?
Great, how are you?
I am marvellous.
Welcome.
This really is an event because we're in the Sony Pictures lot, which is, I don't know, it's like half a block, isn't it, this thing?
Yeah, if not a full one. I mean, it keeps going for a while. I mean, it's a very big property. And
huge.
For people who haven't been here or maybe live nearby, no over-exaggeration, is literally a 100-foot rainbow outside of this building.
Maybe bigger. I remember as I was walking in, it just kind of goes up and around you. It's like...
Yeah, it's the cherry on the cake in terms of the Hollywood experience, isn't it?
And it's just, I got dropped off in an Uber and we sort of drove around the building trying to figure out where the entrance was.
Oh yeah, that's always fun. It's like Fort Knox too, so...
Fantastic.
And invariably your GPS will bring you to the exact wrong side of the lot where the guards will let you in, and then you have your mile walk to get here.
Right.
But at least you have a good landmark to find the building.
It is beautiful, and this is an amazing location.
Oh yeah, it's incredible. This is the Thalberg building. It was built in 1937, I believe, and as a historical landmark. It was one of the first, the old executive building for Columbia Pictures, and the thing that's kind of amazing to me is everything's completely original in here. So the hallway where we're in right now used to be a screening room, and the hallway here has 6 different theaters, and all of that was original. Like all these varying size screening rooms were built in 37 for this purpose. So it's
amazing.
If these walls could talk.
Beautiful room.
Decent stories.
Oh, absolutely. So basically, they would watch some of the first.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah. And that still goes on in the still working screening rooms where directors, producers, or execs and actors, they come in and they see the first cuts and, discuss who's getting fired, I suppose. And
what they're reshooting, what they're editing out.
Right.
Yeah.
And one of the funny parts actually about the history behind why this became available was it's the smallest screening room on the lot, and only had a film projection, so you can imagine how fast this went out of service. But the main thing against it was why it was so small, because apparently when everybody's doing these first cut screenings, everyone needs a row to themselves to sit and also fit their ego. So I think that's what's going on, and so no one would ever use this one because you needed like 20 rows for everyone.
I see. Well, it's an absolutely gorgeous room.
Thank you.
I love the sort of like Hollywood style Roman columns because they're flat. It's got that classic kind of, when you watch a movie and then like a Mel Brooks movie and it comes back and you see that they're all just facades.
Yeah, exactly.
It has that. It's so Hollywood, but it's a gorgeous room. Yeah. What an amazing location. Definitely great for a mastering engineer. It's not like you're going to get any pop buys. Nobody's just going to accidentally walk in like, oh yeah, I was in the neighborhood.
Yeah, exactly. You're not going to get that, and if you do, it's usually someone really famous. So that's always cool.
Yes. Very nice. So how long have you been here?
Now it's been 3 years, so going on 4 in June.
Wow.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
For those of you that don't know your French, Boulanger is actually French for bakery, or is it baker?
Well, it would be baker, I suppose.
Baker,
Boulangerie is the bakery, but
exactly.
The funny part about that was when I first got kind of hooked in high school on recording and dorking out, it came to mind. I was like, if ever I have my own studio, A, that would be so cool, and B, I'm calling it the bakery. Like, it was just immediate. And so when things had to come to fruition here very quickly, signing the corporate letter to incorporate and everything, was the easiest process ever for me, because it was like, well, here we go, the bakery. Keep going. And it was like no thought process whatsoever.
I totally relate. I have an obsession with airplanes of the Second World War. Mm-hmm. So everything I do is Spitfire.
Oh, okay. Makes sense.
And being
British.
Yeah. British. So I understand. Yeah, it's great when we get to, because ultimately we're doing music, which is like our childhood fantasy, isn't it? You're a kid and you actually get to make money in music.
Yeah, it's kind of strange. It's kind of funny too. Like, I'll get home or people ask you this all the time, like, "Oh, what do you listen to?" At home or driving back from work, and everyone's shocked when you're like, "Well, I don't really listen to music because I've been doing it all day." But like, and then everyone's like, "Oh man, that's so depressing." It's like, no. You're totally misunderstanding this. I get to listen to music all day. It's always new stuff too. Mm-hmm. And you get paid for it. Like,
yeah.
So listening to the news on the way back home is great.
Yeah. I do find on a personal note that I love, as I get older, I love the music I loved as a child even more.
Oh yeah, definitely. The guilty pleasures especially.
Yeah.
We won't have to mention any of those. I've already embarrassed myself on camera in that way too many times.
Oh. Well, but I'd love to talk a bit about your journey of how you got here.
Sure.
I see a direct correlation with you and the sort of classic engineers, producers and mixers and everything that came up, because you're a violin player. Mm-hmm. Al Schmidt name-checked you in our last interview that we did last week. As like his mastering guy. You assisted him. Was that straight out of school?
So when I was still in college, well, I guess I'll give, like you said, I was a violinist my whole life. Still play professionally. Then once I got into, I ended up jumping ships. I didn't want to do any more conservatory or anything. And so I was like, for college, for undergrad, I'm going to do like music and something else. So I ended up doing that and studying electrical engineering just because I was bored out of my mind studying music still. And the whole reason for that was because they had a studio there and I really started getting into recording and whatnot. And so that led up to one summer when I came out to visit my uncles, and I basically did the stereotypical Hollywood thing, which was to go down the phone book. Phone books still were around. And call every studio I could and ask for an internship for the following summer. And it may come as no surprise that the answer was no for all of them. But nonetheless, through one of these phone calls, I got put in touch with Nick Doffelmeyer at the time at Universal Mastering. And somehow he and I just got into a little conversation and I made him late for some meeting. So he had to like hang up with me all quickly. So he's like, "Just come in for lunch tomorrow, kid." I'm like, "Okay, great." And he hung up so fast, I was like, "Well, what time's lunch
time?
And where?" I was like, "Whatever, I'll figure it." I was like, "I'll just show up at noon."
Yeah, good for you.
Did so. We had a great lunch, and I believe Pete Dell just started working at that location, like at that time. And I mean, of course, Nick and Pete knew each other for years and years, but Pete had mixed something and Ron McMaster was mastering it at Capitol. And so Nick asked Pete if I could tag along to his mastering session. Great. And mind you, this whole time I was only into recording and mixing. Like, mastering was not even ever an idea of mine even. But I kept on getting stuck in this mastering thing, I suppose. Anyway, they pulled me in, watched the session with Ron, and of course Pete had worked at Capitol for eons. So he gave me the full tour. And that day was pretty spectacular because Stevie Wonder was recording in A, and Eric Clapton and J.J. Cale were recording in B.
Oh, I remember that record.
Yeah, and I got to meet all of them, and I was there like, yeah, I think this is a good idea. And then Pete introduces me to Paula Salvatore, and basically over the next few weeks, I remember calling her 12 times in a row because it was 3 times a day, and it took 4 days to get through to her. because I kept on getting filtered out by her assistant, you know?
Oh, we all get filtered.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Even when I booked it with Al, I still, you know, I spoke to the assistant 3 times and then she called me back and confirmed the booking.
That's how it goes.
That's the process.
Yeah.
That's the process.
And so the story goes that Dave, the assistant at the time, goes into Paula's office on the 12th call and says, "For the love of God, can you take the call? It's the kid again." And so she did, and because they never even had interns, like, surprisingly. It may have something to do with it still being a union facility for the staff engineers. And I just told her, "I want to intern for you, blah, blah, blah." She's like, "Yeah, okay." And basically, we invented the position. Now there's interns there, so proud of that. And so I was technically Capitol's first ever intern. And the beauty about that, well, it was kind of twofold, but they just didn't know what to do with me. They never had one. So it was like, at first, incredibly boring, because it was like, okay, so you're allowed in the door, but we don't know what to do with you. So I kind of discovered the trick to getting in good with everyone, which is just cleaning. And so I'd start organizing back rooms and whatnot, and then they would start letting me into studios. I think that summer I detailed every single console and outboard gear, the whole thing, realigned every knob to, you know, where when it points to 0, it's at unity. That was not the case on many things. And so I was doing all of that sort of work, and that's what kind of, you know, let me stick around in the studios and whatnot. And of course, when I first started, Al was like on a long vacation or something, and then he finally got back and didn't even really pay attention to me or anything. But like by this time, he just was like, he and Steve would let me stick around with them all the time. And so, you know, Al became my first professional mentor. Not a bad place to start. Right. And God knows how much I learned from them that summer. I mean, one of my favorite things I used to play was kind of the Al Schmidt microphone game. And I only admitted this to him like recently. He didn't even know that I knew that I would do this. But like, of course, all of his setups, you know, if it's a certain size group or whatever, he has his typical setups and everything. Every now and then there'd be a revision to something for different size. And so as the musicians, you set up the session, and then as the musicians come in, traditionally Al will go and talk with each guy and reposition the mics and get them just so once they're actually in their seat. And so I would run around the studio really quickly as the musicians would come in to put the mics like in the real right position. And when Al would come in and start talking with everyone and, you know, doing his job, I just like stand in the corner quietly watching to see if he moves it or not. And then finally there was like, at the end of the summer, one session where he didn't have to move anything. And I was like, got it.
You got it. Yeah.
So that was, you know, it's the little things like that where you really, those experiences are just, you know, priceless.
So wait there, you're mastering. Don't you want to come along and be my assistant? I mean, how much do you cost?
Yeah.
It sounds good.
It's
Eric,
funny.
are you learning? This is...
It's funny. We just I just had that experience recently with David Boucher, great engineer, also does a lot of scoring. So and lives in Culver City, so he's over here all the time. Also my pub mate. But anyway, he was setting up for some score like last year, and so I walked over, just said hi, want to go to the pub, and I go in the live room and I see this weird biodynamic microphone. And it was like a spot mic for a cello solo. And I was like, well, that's a really strange choice. And I was thinking to myself, I'm like, I've seen that before. I started going through like my memory banks, which are now getting rusty. And I remember back to a session at Capitol, and it was the Daniel Powter record, you know, the Bad Day thing. And I was like, yeah, there was some dude who used all these biodynamic mics, and it was on that Daniel Powter thing, And then I started thinking about it. I was like, Boucher looks a lot like the engineer that was engineering that day. I couldn't remember who it was or anything. And I go in the room and I'm like, hey, Boucher, did you engineer Daniel Powder and do it at Studio B in Capitol? He's like, yeah, why? And I was like, oh my God, I was your assistant. And then like the look of shock comes on his face because now he's remembering. And, I was a scrawny kid with no beard.
Right.
And he just dropped everything he was doing and started doing laps around the studio screaming, Eric was my assistant, which was hilarious. So yeah, it's especially in LA, it's so fun how small the world is too. So I'm just surprised I didn't remember him, but.
Well, if you had your head down and you were doing your job, sometimes.
Yeah, that was definitely the case,
I've done many sessions, even as the engineer, when I'm working with a producer. I mean, we were talking about off camera, I did something with David Foster recently. If David didn't remember me that well, I wouldn't be offended.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's my job to, he said, I'm going to play piano and I should be in record with the mics ready to go and it's sounding fantastic. I've done my job if I don't have to then talk to him for 10 minutes to explain why it doesn't sound good. You know what I mean? If it sounds good immediately, he just starts playing and then he's moving on.
Right.
So it sounds like you had a great interaction and on a work level.
Oh yeah, definitely. And, especially in recording scenarios too, obviously the pressure is way higher than mastering where like, oh, whoops, I didn't do that right. Let's just redo it, recording, everything's happening then, all the musicians are there and everything. So you kind of go into your focus days where suddenly everything around here you're not paying attention to. So I kind of miss that about recording, but.
Well, I mean, I think this is great because it does reiterate my sort of belief about you that you come from a high-level musician world, like you can really play. I've asked lots of people, yes, you can really play. You're a great musician. I mean, I grew up on classical music, so I have a real affinity for that kind of background. Phil Ramone, of course, has that same pedigree. The fact that you got...
Armin Steiner.
Oh, yeah.
Another violinist.
Yeah.
Must be a violin thing.
Must be a violin thing. And so you've got that, and you started off interning and assisting at Capitol. How did you transition from that into mastering? What was the next step?
Well, that was probably, frankly, the easiest transition because I went back to school to finish up my last year, and then I moved permanently back out here. So when I came back to LA, I needed a job. And so in an effort to do that, I was interviewing around town, and of course, I met back up with Al, and at one point, I think my best scenario of, being able to pay for in and out would have been to be a tech at Capitol, a tech at the Village, and an assistant at the plant. Obviously, all three being extremely part-time that I'd bounce between.
Right. And
right as all of that was going on, Al calls and says, Doug Sachs is looking for someone. It'd be full-time. Call him and go to Ojai now. Now, like I mentioned before, my head was totally in, at that point, actually, only mixing. Like the experience at Capitol, I had already resigned, like, no, I want to be a mixer. I don't want to do recording. And the main reason for it was because at Capitol, you do a lot of string dates. Mm-hmm. And as fun as it was working the recording, setting up the mics and learning from Al and everything, the second we actually hit record and there's a string section in the other room, I was preparing my noose in the control room being like, you're just looking at, Pro Tools go by, and I wanted to be in the other room playing because it was like, it was just killing me. I was like, I can't torture myself with that anymore. Mixing, you don't have that problem. Perfect. And of course, it's the most creative part of the engineering process, where you can have, a ton of manipulation and influence. So that's where my head was at. And then I get a call from Alan saying to go interview for Doug Sax. So mastering was not on my radar. I was like, mastering, okay, whatever. But the fact of the matter is when Al Schmidt tells you to go see Doug Sax, if you're not in a car, just quit. Like that, you would have, there was no question that it's like, okay, this is happening. So go up, meet Doug, and boy, is he a character. You know, basically Doug hired me on the spot. So I was like, in my head, driving back home that day, like, well, guess you're mastering now. And so that was that jump. And fast forward a little bit with Doug, you know, one of the things that Doug always liked and loved to say was, especially early on, was that the best part about Eric was he doesn't want to be a mastering engineer, which was totally true at the time. You know, I was doing a lot of the tech work, obviously assisting Doug on everything. Then in 2009, this was after we closed Hollywood, the mastering lab in Hollywood. In 2009, finally Doug decides to bring back delays and bring back vinyl. And so that fell in my lap to redo. And the real problem about that project was everything that was taken out of the mastering lab, vinyl-wise, was taken apart and thrown into a storage unit as if it's never going back together again. Not much care was had. So there was a lot damaged, missing, all of that. I mean, it was a real nightmare. And the real problem was I had no experience with any of it. And then the vast majority of the systems in it were all custom built by the techs over the years. And, you know, especially the control systems and whatnot. And therefore, there's zero documentation on anything. And you're looking at, you know, and you have to fix something that's like 30 years old and doesn't work with no documentation. That's when... That's when
30 years old, that was probably some of the newer equipment.
Yeah, exactly. I think one of my favorite moments of the whole reverse engineering project and getting things together was I was working really late one night, and I was the only one there at the studio, and Doug comes in. He's like, what the heck are you doing here? I was like, building your system, what do you think? And then he's like, not anymore, take a break. Let's go upstairs and shoot some pool. And so he pours the whiskey, we go upstairs and start shooting pool. And however the conversation got started, I realized something that Doug just was not understanding. And I was like, hey, Doug, you know, it's around 6th grade when you have a little allowance money and you go with your friends to the record store to buy music. And because it's the cool thing to do, I'm like, do you know what I bought? And he's like, starts rattling off bands and everything that were like way before my time anyway. But I was like, no, Doug, you're missing the point. He's like, what? I'm like, I bought a CD.
Yeah.
And he was like, no.
Yeah.
I'm like, yes. Vinyl was gone for me at that point. Like, I'm like, I'm building this system downstairs and I've yet to buy a vinyl record. Like, this is kind of hilarious.
Yeah. That's pretty insane.
Yeah, it was really funny. So we had a damn good laugh over that one. So it was kind of a fun experience. I think one of the things that really got me starting to get interested or get more serious about the prospect of mastering was that experience of setting up this format and everything that I had absolutely previously zero ties to, you know, whereas still 75% of the planet did, you know.
Sure. What year was this? 2009?
Yeah.
2009.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was one of those guys that even when CDs came in, I was still holding on to that vinyl.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it was for me, and this is an interesting sort of sidestep, I'd love to know your opinion. I don't know if I was holding on to vinyl for the sonics. It was the experience.
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, the sonics of vinyl, like, I suppose I'm not a good salesman. I mean, can be awfully worse than what we can do with high resolution, for sure. The thing that I wish the record industry would finally understand is we're not selling formats. Like, you're not selling a vinyl, you're not selling a CD, you're selling an experience.
Yes.
And obviously the vinyl is the forced experience. And I mean, for all that you have to go through just to get that record onto your turntable and press play, including like going to your fridge and cracking open a beer to sit down on your couch with while you listen through, like, of course you're in a listening mode and you're going to think it sounds better because you're having a ball. Like, you know, when have you ever done that with even a CD?
Yeah, I agree.
I've yet to find someone who does. I'm sure there's a few out there, but they probably have better vision too.
I think exactly. Exactly. I mean, we went from this gatefold sleeve where you're looking at, you know, you're seeing not only the band, but everybody that worked on it. You're reading along with the lyrics. You've got visuals, whatever, all of this great stuff. To, yes, exactly, CDs are now increasingly not even that. Now it's just an image this big. I will say, though, you touched on high res there. I will say, when you search out and you go to, what's that website for the high res?
HD Tracks.
HD Tracks.
Yeah.
When you go there and you deliberately download something, that recreates that feeling because you're going there specifically because you want to hear whatever album it is, and you just get to, But you're right, with CDs it was, I don't know, there was never anything impressive about bringing a girl over to your apartment and having, like, you know, 1,000 pieces of plastic.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? It never looked quite as good as a big record stack, you know.
Yeah, nowadays dating life, I guess, is like, hey, babe, you want to come over to my place and look at my Spotify playlist?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and you can't just sort of casually, you know, you could casually have whatever latest and greatest album just laying on your table. Like, look at me, I'm hip, I know what's going on.
Yeah.
How do you do that now? Yeah. No, I love that. I mean, I've talked to various different, and it's always mastering engineers that give good perspective, because I feel like some of us as producers still get a little carried away with vinyl, you know, and our theories on it, but mastering engineers will always, you know, you'll always set us straight because, you know the process that you're having to whop off lows and highs so that the stylus stays on track, basically. And then the idea, as you get to the center of the record, that was always the throwaway track because it never sounded as good as the first song.
Right, exactly. Those rules still apply.
Those rules still apply. So in that case, that makes me think of a question. I suppose people are probably, hopefully they're asking for this advice, but are they coming to you saying, hey, I want this album to be on vinyl? And not only are you advising them on how long they should be, presumably 17 minutes or less, is that correct?
Yeah, just about.
And then, but also maybe track order. Like, don't put your hit single at the end of side one. You know?
Exactly. And then obviously the Achilles heel is sibilance as well. And that doesn't matter where it is on the record. Obviously on the inside it's more pronounced. But, you know, the good part about this resurgence, or whatever we're calling it, is, first of all, there's a large portion of producers and engineers out there who still remember this, still know it. And the even better part is now there's a bunch of, you know, younger producers and engineers who have learned it, you know, whether it's from the old guys or from videos like this, you know. So that's really exciting. And the fact of the matter is, walking in the door, there's more and more people, especially younger guys coming in who now understand the format. And they're like, I sequenced everything just because I want to put the side break here, and, you know, it's 18 minutes. Do you think I'm pushing it a little bit too much? I want to make this loud and, like, deep. And I'm like, yeah, that's great. Thanks for doing my job. Great. You know? And then, especially amongst the younger record label employees, you get the polar opposite. I kid you not, probably one of my favorite moments of this absolute, no care for educating yourself in the least was I got chewed out by this young lady at a record label for, of course, everything's due yesterday, so you take that with a grain of salt, but we're behind schedule, whatever.
No, they just thought of it today, and it should have been done yesterday.
Correct,
yes.
Yeah. And now it's my fault.
Yes, we all know that.
Yes. So that's the cost of doing business, fine. But so, of course, this thing was in a rush. And, I thought I pulled a miracle. Got everything done. Sides look good. Get them in the box. It's only going to RTI. And I made FedEx. That's very important. You missed that FedEx truck and very different story.
You can't hightail a vinyl master.
So this is where we're going with this story. So I pull a miracle, and probably my first mistake was to email them. Maybe they had asked for me to say something, but I email them with like the tracking number. I'm like, we did it. Can't believe it. Have a great night, blah, blah, blah. And I get this phone call. And it's this employee at the record label who's chewing me out. I told you, we're late. We're going to miss our street date and everything. And you put it in the mail? Why don't you just upload it? And I
didn't know that was where I was going. When I said hightail, I was just,
I think I had the same reaction.
That was too obvious. I was like, I couldn't believe it. Wow.
Oh, man. I never actually have, like, blatantly laughed in someone's face as hard as that. But she deserved it. I was like, how daft could you be to
but that's sort
the
of
field you're working in?
It's like, yes, she was an idiot. The person above her is an even bigger idiot for not educating. The person above that person's an even bigger idiot than they. That's just so sad.
I think it's because that chain of command all think that you can upload a file.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's a scary place.
Yeah. So that was exciting. One of the trials and tribulations of.
Did she at least apologize for misunderstanding?
Of course not. It's a record label.
Oh, okay. Well.
What kind of craziness is that?
So give us a little sort of. So you were with Doug at the mastering lab for how long? How many years were you there?
A little over 8 years.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah. So long time. Lots of stories there.
Well, is there any spring to mind immediately when you said lots of stories?
Oh, well, I suppose I could give the fuller version of when I interviewed for him, which was a very strange experience. So, of course, I was used to the Capitol life, right? And which was extremely busy, especially with how many musicians are going in and out. So, first of all...
Probably very, very structured as well, being union.
Yeah, certainly more structured than the mastering lab. That's right. No question. So first and foremost, it was the summer and I'm driving up, and this is before you had GPS on your phones. So I'm there with like my MapQuest printout and notes from Doug, and of course he tells me to take the back way up to Ojai. I think probably just to torture me more, but I remember like. It just, at one point, the road felt like, a Western film. And I was like, it can't possibly be this far. It's only an hour and a half drive if you know what you're doing. But, like, this just seemed like it was going on forever and ever. It was really hot that day. And I remember stopping twice along the way, just at gas stations to figure out whether or not I was even still on the right path. But finally I get there, and the Ojai lab was kind of a strange building and entrance. The front door looked like it should be a side entrance as opposed to... So I end up going in the very back of the building, which is used to be a loading dock for this company before it, and that's where they had the tech shop. And so, immediately I meet Tom and Josh Florian. Now, Josh of JCF Audio, Josh had worked with Doug, for years, and I think at that time when I was interviewing, maybe like a year or two beforehand, did he just go off on his own and form JCF. But well, as Josh does here too, like he comes in and would help at the mastering lab a lot and get hired for whatever we had going on. And so Josh was furiously working on something in there and basically didn't give me the light of day. I was like, okay, whatever, but this is kind of cool. I'm like looking over his shoulder and had no idea what he was doing. And finally I get led up and meet Doug. He brings me in the main room and everything, sits me down in like the hot seat. And he had like his assistant at the time in the room, and up on the tape machine was a Diana Krall record.
Beautiful.
How am I blanking on the album title? Quiet Nights. Al's half-inch 30 on the deck. And I'm like, and I was familiar with that record, of course. And I was like, well, what are you doing with this? Are you remastering? And he's like, oh no. We're testing capacitors. What? And in comes Josh with a preamp. Turns out what he was doing that day was he was thinking about gearing up to make another run of the Mastering Lab preamps. And one of the critical components in, that amp was, he used back in the day CRC caps, Component Research Company, which had gone out of business in the 90s. They closed up shop. And, to Doug's ear, there was no other finer cap. So they had gotten a bunch of different caps to audition, singular caps. So this was the interesting thing. I guess I'll do the story first before I explain it. But so Josh comes in with the preamp. I guess he was rigging something. They plug it in. And Doug's like, well, let's test the kid's ears. And he presses play. And he's like, take a listen to everything and tell me this or that. So starts playing this, that, this or that, this or that. And then he stops it and he's just laughing. He's like, well, at least the kid can hear. Okay. And he's like, do you know what you're listening to? And I was like, oh, you're working on some piece of gear. You're probably like tuning the cap value or something, because the other thing in my head was not knowing what the heck he was asking me. And they were subtle differences, but like right. It was noticeable enough that I would have never come up with this in my head, because like, at that point in time, a capacitor was a symbol on a piece of paper, like sure. They all have the same function. And lo and behold, he finally reveals that what I was listening to was same values, just different caps, not even different types, all metal film, all the same ones, just different manufacturers.
Wow.
And to hear that degree of difference between the two, I was like, okay.
Wow.
And one of the genius things of testing it that I thought was the reason why he was using the tape machine. Admittedly, he was using a pretty valuable master, but
yeah.
I mean, that was just Doug. There was 0 Fs given, you know? And so he wanted something that really sounded good, I'd say so, and B, that he liked listening to. So
yeah, enjoying the process.
Yeah, that's why you go back to the tape vault, find the priceless Diana Krall masters that, of course, the label never requested back because, FedEx costs way too much.
Yeah.
And you use that. But anyway, the genius part about it is in their tape machine, like, Doug's brother's design, it's incredibly simplistic. So to do whichever curve you need to do, like NAB curve, when you think about it, it's really kind of a one-pole filter. So what he did was wrapped around, he had his normal amp, and in the feedback path would put one cap. It was very simplistic. And that one cap, for the most part, by moving that curve around, with the adjustments, you could basically make up 99% of any curve that you would need for a tape. Of course, there were a few other adjustments for different shelvings and stuff like that, but that's neither here nor there. The point is, in this test, to listen between the capacitors, the beauty of it is, when you think about it, I mean, you're up 20 and down 20 at both ends of the spectrum. So that's a 40 dB. 40 dB, that one single cap has to work. That's as exposed as like every single thing that you're listening to has to go through that and has to work on its time constant. So the reason why he was testing the caps in that configuration was just because if there's any place it's going to be apparent, it's going to be there. And I was like,
right.
And I started getting this like as I was there, and then like what really turned me on to like, okay, this is why this guy is nuts. That's number one, and I really want to work for him because
this guy's nuts.
Because this guy's nuts, yeah. And so right after I'm thinking that, he's like, time for lunch. And to prove my point, we all then pile into his 1937 Cadillac. No air conditioning on a 120-degree day.
Oh, yeah. Oh, hi.
Yep. And drive then like a block and a half, I swear, to a fish place and have a great lunch, talking about all this stuff and everything. Get back in the car, and on our way back to the lab in this block and a half, we get pulled over. And we're all back there. And it was because I guess his license plate had fallen off of this old car, and he just never bothered to put it back on. And so, we're there just dripping in sweat, and Josh, in his very dry sense, like kind of leans down with the cop at the door, and he's like, "We work there. Can we just leave?" And the cop like looks us over, and he's like, "Yeah." And so I'm like, "Oh, thank God, I don't want to be in that car anymore." So the three of us walk and leave Doug behind with the cop. And so I get back into the office, and they're doing their own things, and I'm the new guy there, but not hired or anything. So it was like really awkward, and no one was talking to me. So I just kind of wait in the lobby there, and it was taking a while. And then finally, you see the door fly open, and Doug comes in cursing, calling the cop every other name under the sun because he got a ticket. And he looks at me and he says, "Who are you?" I'm like, "Eric, I think I'm interviewing for you." He's like, "Oh yeah, come with me." And that was our first pool game. And I think it was mainly that the pool table was where all the whiskey was hidden, if you can't tell from these stories. Yeah. And he needed a glass after that. And so we start playing pool and talking more about, what would go on, all of this kind of thing. And I kind of swept the table from him, which he actually could play pool really good. So I don't know how I did this, but like I was one shot away from, sinking the 8-ball. And Doug just says to me, he's like, "You're not allowed to beat the boss at playing pool." And so I'm like lining up. I'm like, "Well, therein lies our current problem. You haven't hired me." He's like, "You start on Monday." And I just took the cue ball and threw it into a pocket. And he was like, "That's right."
That's fantastic.
Yeah, that's how you get hired by Doug Sachs.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
While you're talking about him and you're talking about the attention to detail, the first time I remember hearing his name in America was I was working with Dave Jordan in like 98, and he had Little Golds.
Oh, yeah.
And he was like, oh yeah, I've got like 8 pairs. He goes, but I only use two pairs. I got 1 pair here, 1 pair there. And I was like, why is that? And he takes around the back. He goes,
crossover.
because it's got the mastering lab, Doug Sax mastering lab crossovers in it. That's how they sound good.
Yeah.
So I have an understanding, because that's the first time I heard his name, was in association with that kind of attention to detail, that he took these classic speakers and redesigned the crossover. Yeah,
it's actually kind of a interesting turn of events, that circuit too, because that was all Bill Schnee. He had found the SGM 10s and were trying them out, and brought a pair over to Steve Hazelton, who was Doug's main tech, and he was just like, these things could sound better. Like, there's something electronic about it. It's not good. And apparently, the original crossover, the design is actually rather sophisticated for being a passive device like that. And really did phase align everything like perfectly, but sounded like crap. And so the thing that's kind of funny about what they turned out, like the crossover that's in those SGM 10s are basically identical to just the simple passive system that at the Hollywood lab they'd use in between driver components in the Altex, and just tuned for smaller driver. And the thing that's kind of funny about that whole thing was, they just did it by ear and experiments and everything, and if Tannoy were to measure its response and everything, I'm sure it would look like a phase nightmare. But
right,
the second anyone heard those, like, you don't go back. And still to this day, that's like, Al still uses them every single day. It's amazing.
Right. Yeah, they're phenomenal. They were Dave Jordan's favorite speakers. I remember he had things like, the kick drum, he goes, if you just hear like just a little tiny breakup, that's when it's perfect. Like these little things. Yeah, pretty amazing.
Right.
And I had a pair of his for the longest time, but he did eventually ask for them back. They're hard to get hold of her, but now actually Eva Manley's rebuilding them, isn't she?
Yeah, Ivana's rebuilds all of it. The hardest part about it, and I've even questioned it, because Ivana is another dear friend who's absolutely mental, like the best of us. Yeah. And she's winding her own transformers and everything for, other products. And I was like, if there's anyone who can figure this shit out, it's going to be her. Yep. And the hardest part, though, right now is the actual cone. The recone kits are getting harder and harder to find since they haven't been made in so long. And that's the only thing that will go wrong. For people that
don't know this speaker, it is, in England, this is not the proper name, but in England we used to call them dual concentric. So it's a complicated speaker to make.
Oh yeah, it's not a simple paper cone. Yeah. It's coaxial. So there's two.
That's the proper term.
Yeah. Actually, I think Tannoy branded it as dual concentric as well.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So
yeah, that's what we called it.
There you go. Yeah. Whichever term you want to, but it's obviously it's 2 cones in one. That's the hard thing. Sorry. And that's the difficulty right now, because it's also the only thing that'll break. It's, if you burn up that Mastering Lab crossover that's inside of there, that's impressive. Like, you probably have lost your hearing anyway, so sure. I don't think it matters. But
right.
There's very little in that circuit to burn up, and they are very large. So that would be very impressive.
But has she figured out getting?
Oh yeah, no, she's been building it for years.
But the speakers as well.
The cones. Yeah. I don't believe so.
Yeah.
But something tells me that she'll probably do it one of these days.
Once she figures that out, I think that
maybe she'll watch this and get back on it.
Watch this space.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So that was how you got started.
Yep.
One of the biggest reasons why I like doing this is because I remember as a child listening to music, and I grew up on classical music. My dad brought me my first rock and roll album, but it was after I'd been in, I've heard frickin' Spring Symphony before I heard rock and roll. You know what I mean? That's, anybody knows what I'm talking about. That's pretty frickin' intense. So I came from like that and the Messiah to suddenly like, hearing rock and roll. So rock and roll was like, oh yeah, this is cool. And so
where in England did you grow up?
I grew up in a little village called Crookham Village.
And how far away is that from?
From London? Well, I went to Covent Garden maybe 50 times. So,
yeah.
My family are all.
There's quite a
Londoners.
selection of halls there that you could choose from.
Yeah, so opera, it was Verdi and Puccini, and that was definitely just. My father was a painter, he was an artist, so it was all just arts based. But enough about me. What I'm trying to say is like to get back to that kid, because a lot of what this side of it is, and a lot of conversation is like, careers and getting paid and how do I make money and all this kind of stuff. And I understand all of those things because I had those same questions growing up and trying to figure out how am I going to make a living doing this thing that I love. But there's the word, love. That's the most important thing about this. Do you love music? Do you love making it? Do you love listening to it? Do you love being involved in the creation? Because I feel like everybody I admire and everybody that's been able to make a success of this is because they still passionately love music.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think it's certainly a natural filtering, too, because if you don't love it, man, I wouldn't want to go through all those trials and tribulations otherwise, So there's definitely that. But, yeah, I mean, music, one of the things that I always found interesting specifically about becoming a professional and everything is how, since music somehow is part of like every human being's DNA, it's always funny how like you'll be working on something and then someone asks you about, oh, what did you do today? You could be speaking with like an accountant and explain something, and then they tell you what you were doing wrong about what they were hearing. Mm-hmm. Like, even if you're just talking about it and they're like, I'm not going to tell you what you do wrong on your spreadsheets. Like, what gives here? And it's because, it's just amazing how immediately emotionally connected music makes everyone. Mm-hmm. And so becoming a professional, it's like that was one of those things where you realize, okay, this is just going to continue to happen, and you have to take it with a grain of salt.
Well, that's the thing about music. It's everywhere we are.
Right.
It's in film, it's in TV, it's in the mall.
Right.
It's no matter where you go, which is actually a good kind of segue, because talking about...
My favorite is the elevator music I make.
The elevator music. Well, it's a good segue because I think there's also one of the big needs for a mastering engineer is, yes, you're the last bastion of like sanity. You're going to listen to it and go, hey, Warren, there's a 150 bump going through this whole song. I'm going to pull it out. You're gonna tell me maybe you should look at what you're boosting. That from an engineering, from a mixing point of view, it's like it's always nice to be able to get on the phone and figure out, because you're the last bastion. You're sitting in a room that's far more tuned than any mixer would ever be in, with speakers that are probably 10 times more than anything we would ever pay for so you are the last bastion, but there's also a sense of organization and that comes with the technical side. Of like, somebody's going to come to you, like you were saying, with the label, or joking aside, they're going to come to you and say, okay, we need high res, so you're going to have to upsample it. You need it at 192. We need a 96. We need a stereo. We want a split mono. We want a 16-bit, a 24-bit, a 32-bit. We want it. And also, can you master the 5.1 version? And now we're talking about doing an Atmos, and we need a vinyl, and we need a master for iTunes,
And the most important part about all those formats, too, is once you do the first reference and it's approved to the label, they think that's just like a button we press.
Right.
And all of that's created.
Yeah. Yeah.
But,
well, I mean, obviously, if somebody's giving you a stereo mix and then they're saying, oh, and by the way, here's the stems for the 5.1, would you master that as well?
They still think there's a button.
Still think there's a button.
Yeah.
But I think that's an important thing about mastering that gets a little bit left out of the conversation, is that exactly the formats isn't just like, oh, can you have those done in half an hour?
Right.
But I also, there's so much more to it because we do get a little bit caught up in gear and plugins, at least I do, and some of the conversations. But I think that's also very interesting for an audience because I have noticed the mastering engineers I admire are honest about either working hybrid or in the box and not always just making it about the hardware. I think, if you do go to a place and they've got 3 pieces of hardware and they're not using plugins, you just better hope that your music works in that environment.
Sure.
Yeah.
Or that they can steer those 3 boxes, to do so. I will say specifically about plugins, the one thing that I enjoyed the most, like a Massenburg EQ is a perfect example, is, you can move things by 1 hertz at a time or 0.1 dB at a time. And like you were touching on earlier, the most important facet of the mastering studio is your monitoring. It has nothing to do with what's touching the music at all. It's how I'm able to hear and make those decisions. And so when you have proper monitoring like that, and especially when I got this setup dialed in and everything, suddenly I could hear those tenths of a dB really working or not. And the best part with the plugin like that is when you can just absolutely nail it in the right perfect spot, you end up using so far less. Like, you could swing on an analog EQ and take out 3 dB of something, and click it, and then finally it starts working. Or you could use 4/10 of Massenburg at like the perfect frequency, and then you're like, yeah, there we go. And I think there's no truer statement in engineering audio at all, which is less is more. Like,
right.
It's always boils down to that. And when you can use less like that, and you're not, yanking on everything left and right, it always seems that, you have far more resolution to the recording. It's probably a matter of fidelity, right? Because it's closer to what actually happened. So, that's, you could come up with the same EQ curve or effects rather, by yanking on an analog EQ versus dialing in perfectly a digital one. But that digital one is just going to be open, and you have the depths, and it's kind of funny when these words are coming out of my mouth when the connotation is that's what analog's supposed to do, right? You know? But I think that's a matter of how you drive either ship. That's number one. And I mean, the other fact of the matter is, if we were having this conversation 15 years ago, maybe we wouldn't be as proud of our digital plugins. But I mean, everything's come a long way, and certainly the furthest way we've come is, the incorporation of plugins with the DAWs and their mixers, and having now very high resolution mixers, and I mean, Pro Tools is 64 float, like, that has less format changing going back and forth too, I think has had a profound effect on the resolution that plugins get to play with. So,
absolutely.
And never mind also in the file delivery, more often than not, everything that's coming in now is 32 float. And, that there's those people out there, they're probably the same league who would say that 44.1 is the highest sample rate that you need because of Nyquist. It's like, oh, congratulations, you found this Nyquist guy on Wikipedia, and now you've formulated some theory. We can go into that later, but the fact of the matter is everything's coming in. I'm
feeling a very, very strong part 2 coming up.
Oh, yes.
I think we need to. I do honestly think we need to come back and do a part 2.
More than welcome. I'd love to.
Yeah, I love this. Yeah,
the sultry side of electrical engineering at the bakery. Where was I? Oh, 32-bit files coming in. There's a lot of information there, and yes, far more than any D to A can replicate. Any D to A, I mean, the highest flash ones I think are still up to 20. Like Delta Sigmas, we won't go into how it's really an approximation of resolution, but The fact of the matter is there's more resolution coming into the file, but that's important for one of two reasons. A, when you're mixing, especially if it's a mix in the box or processing in there, like now you have that much more level to play around with. And if things get clipped, and when I say clipped, like you can't trust your meter that good. Like there could be overages or intersample if you're using 0 as your highest mark. Well, 32-bit's going to retain everything. You can attenuate it, and it won't be clipped now.
Right.
So it's retaining that information because it's got more to it. And the other aspect is if you send me a 32-bit file and I do want to process it with a digital EQ, or I need or I want to put like a compressor or something on it in the digital domain and need some headroom, I've got so much more to play around to feed these processors that do that math and turn those numbers and sound differently because of it. So it's only helping the whole experience. Of course, if I were to do an analog transfer with a 32-bit file, now it's going through a D to A, and now it's not as important. But the fact of the matter is the 32 isn't going to affect that, and certainly not going to damage it. And second of all, I don't know what I'm going to do, so I'd rather have more resolution than less.
Sure.
So,
what are your D to A's? What do you go to on things?
Both D to A and A to D are custom JCF audios. Yeah, Josh.
Right.
And the fun part about the design of them is their routing, and the backs of them have a lot more connectors to them because part of everything has to do with the routing of the console as well. So instead of having like either a bunch of switches or a patch bay or something to go in between individual components, like I kind of knew what I wanted. And so we built that into those components so there's no cable runs.
Right.
So that's what makes them particularly special in this usage. If you were to take them out and use them anywhere else, people would be scratching their heads. But
Sure. No, I understand. So I know I'm going to get asked, your console's facing this way.
Oh,
Your
yes.
speakers are behind us. And we can turn the camera around and see that there's lights and Christmas decorations.
It's
you have your
almost
ATCs
Christmas.
back there.
Yep.
So tell me, how are you working? Are you?
Well, this is completely learned from. This was Doug's idea, and so the original mastering lab in Hollywood was your traditional speakers console. And if there was anything kind of slightly less traditional about Hollywood was the consoles were all standing consoles. So, they were higher up and the speakers were the size of the walls,
Sure.
But here in Ojai, when Doug opened the Ojai studio for two reasons. He wanted to get out of LA. That was number one. And number two, it was around the time that surround was like 5.1 was really coming into coming to fruition at least, and he thought it was going to take off. Well, we all know what happened, but which, by the way, is like the greatest shame of the industry, really, because in terms of making a record, I'm not talking about like a live concert. Like that seems to be the only surround I get to do anymore. But like if you make a record, like the Wish You Were Here surround that Guthrie did, holy crap. I mean, that may be one of the best things I've ever heard. And, surround sound is the answer to what makes your stereo sound broken, So like the fact that never caught on or hasn't been pushed is such a shame. But I don't think it's over yet. I think we'll find that day, and certainly what we were talking about earlier off camera was all the immersive technologies coming out, and hopefully, home entertainment systems and people putting in these fancy systems into their houses might give us a platform to go off of. But neither here nor there. the speakers facing that way and the console behind you, Doug came up with that idea because, of course, in a studio, what's your biggest acoustical challenge? You have speakers, and right in front of it, you have this massive console with a bunch of knobs and stuff. And so, and think of like Eric Valentine's, the UTA stuff, like that. He showed me once the construction of that material, like they're little beads, so it's a little bit more transparent. Of course,
we're
recording.
Huge Valentine fans, Eric Valentine fans.
Oh yeah. And
he knows his schnizzle.
Oh, I'd say so. Yeah. And of course, that's a little bit different with the console that he's using, but because it's so much bigger. But still, I mean, even here, this big desk is the biggest challenge for any acoustician designing a room. And so in typical Doug Sachs fashion, he was like, well, just don't put it in front of you. Amazing. And, so I'm sure a lot of people immediately, the first question is like, well, things aren't in front of you. You can't be like playing with everything and dialing everything in as you're doing it. And particularly with mastering, where the vast majority of what you're doing is mind blower, listening. Like, you don't need, like, I'm not playing this like my violin, I'm making a few clicks, turning around, listening, deciding if I want anything or not. Most of the switching I do is designed to be over here,
right,
to go between whatever I'm comparing. So I'm usually doing something like this. And,
you know what I was also, sorry to interrupt you,
that's okay.
but you know what I was also thinking? I was also thinking about how often so I have little mini speakers here. I have headphones and I have 3 sets of monitors. And what I end up doing too often, and I admit this, is sitting there and forget to go to my minis. And so I may not be listening that loud, but I have got a pair of Genelecs going like this into my left ear.
Right.
So there was also a part of me that was wondering, there's also that advantage that you're not always listening the same, and you are swapping your ears a little bit.
Yeah, not listening in mono the whole time.
Yeah, either not listening in mono or not listening, maybe that morning there was frickin', tractor drove past you with the window open, and who knows, maybe it was so loud that your 3 to 5 is a little dipped. The fact that you're swapping ears as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it was just a genius idea, and I was
it's really smart.
Ever since Ojai, there was no question what speakers I'd be using and how they'd be facing. The only unique thing about this setup is you'll note that the center speaker is a 50, the ATC SCM 50, I think that's the model number, and the outsides are the 150s, and the only reason why I had the 50, the first thing I tried, demoed, was 3 150s. It's what we had at Mastering Lab as well. But turned out with some experimentation, like where I ended up with the stereo channels for my listening position, when you put a 150 there, it's just its physical size was a little bit big for this isosceles here. So it started interfering, a gnat's ass, but
right.
With the left and right speaker. And I was like, no, those are the most important. And so we tried the 50, doesn't interfere. And strangely, it actually was more balanced sounding than having a 150 there. That part I can't understand. Neither could ATC, but even when they came here and listened, they're like, what do you know? So who knows?
And if it sounds good, it is good.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. That's all you can go off of. And of course, specifically with center channels are always a nightmare. It's where the room is symmetrical, and so you can pick up the max amount of problems with a speaker that's in the center of the room, So there's always oddities that must happen between every single studio in that position. And that probably certainly has a lot going on with that. So
that's amazing. Eric?
Well, pleasure.
Absolutely amazing. Please, everybody, leave lots of comments and questions. I'll see if I can throw you under the bus for some of them.
Sounds good.
I mean, the reality is like we definitely have to come back for a part 2. I know there's loads of people going to ask, and I understand they're going to ask some more technical questions than probably we got into.
Actually, I just came up with a great idea for part 2, which will definitely allure to your orchestra dork side.
Please.
We'll have to go tour the scoring stage.
Really? They'd let us do that?
Absolutely.
That would be amazing.
Oh, definitely.
All right, then we'd have to do a part 3 so we can talk about the lathe.
Oh, sounds good.
Amazing. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you. Oh, and we forgot about our special guest.
Oh, yeah, special guest. Have you been hearing like burrowing going on?
Yeah, or snoring specifically. Come here.
That wasn't somebody in the background. That was a puppy.
Ah, that's this guy. This is Welver, our 4th engineer who can hear 50K and up. Yeah, okay. He just woke up now. He's very confused with these lights.
Have a marvelous time recording, mixing, and mastering. We'll see you all again very soon.
Bye.